So this will be my first podcast. I plan on doing this twice a week from here on out, as a way to cover more material than I'm able to through video releases alone. As I mentioned on Twitter and Gab, with the exception of this first announcement cast, all future casts will be uploaded to patrons over at Patreon. I know most of you aren't supporting me in exchange for anything, but rather to support what I'm doing in a more general way. Even still, I feel like I've neglected you, so I'll be seeking ways to provide perks to those kind enough to help with financial support. It's more appreciated than you could possibly know right this moment. At the same time, I don't want to restrict my work behind a paywall, if at all possible, so I'll be seeking a place to begin uploading most future episodes to make them freely available to all, soon. Patreon first, then the backup location. For those with experience in this realm, who might know of an ideal location to host podcast-type format shows, please let me know. I want to make sure I choose wisely at the outset. I've decided to name this new creation In Pursuit of Clarity, as that'll be our intended purpose here. Much like with most of my videos, I'll be attempting to help expel that poison that's so deeply infected our culture, our language, even our very thought processes over the recent decades, to the best of my ability. If you're listening to this and you don't yet know anything about my work, you can expect this podcast to be on the right with regards to the political spectrum, and in some contexts, far right, but hopefully never coming from a place of hatred or spite or pettiness, as the popular caricature might lead you to assume. And in fact, right or far right aren't even the cleanest labels here. I consider myself to be anti-subversive, anti-corruption. I believe in a creator. I believe he's instilled a natural order, a natural balance and harmony that exists throughout nature and the universe. I believe us to be an integral part of this, whether we like it or not, whether we care to recognize it or not. And I resent and reject those forces that seem to be intent on reshaping us into something unnatural and unhealthy. And I've come to view these as forces of chaos, disrupting natural order, obscuring truths, and muddying waters. If these ideas bother you, this may not be the place for you. But even in these cases, I appreciate those with the objectivity to listen further. Speaking personally, I like to take in opposing points of view often, and if I listen closely, there's almost always something to glean from them, even if it might not be what the speaker intended. So enough prelude, on to the subject at hand. I'm going to refer to these casts as episodes, and this episode will be titled On the Importance of Pulling Back to a Broader Perspective. It's difficult to stress just how important this is, as one seeks to understand the world and develop a worldview accordingly. My goal here will be to explain just why this is so important. We live in an age and culture increasingly dominated by reductionists and reductionism, in which we try to break everything down to its smallest constituent part to best understand it. And this doesn't just apply to our scientific endeavors. I like to think the goal of many reductionist thinkers is a noble one. The idea that we'll analyze everything as minutely as we're able to attain the greatest possible clarity, the most comprehensive understanding of the thing being analyzed. But ironically, in practice, reductionism tends to do the exact opposite. We end up forgetting the forest for the trees. In our obsessive desire to consider and chart and map and discuss every last atom within the tree bark, we often forget that we're dealing with a tree in a sprawling forest, on a planet within a solar system, within a universe. This reductionist trend affects our language, our understanding of ourselves and history, even our manner of thinking and processing the world, much more deeply than we might realize. Gone are the days of old in which the great bards of the Western tradition would recount myths and stories with deep archetypal meaning, wise and lofty words that would help provide order and clarity and a root-level understanding of the world around us. Men who realized the details of stories are practically meaningless, but the broader picture, the archetypes and their interplay, were all important. These point towards a larger, more powerful, and more meaningful reality, one which can only be echoed and hinted at via symbolism and analogy and metaphor. There's a reason Jesus spoke in parables and didn't dryly recount a list of facts. Voltaire once said, "Details that lead to nothing are to history what baggage is to an army. Impedimenta. We must look at things in the large for the very reason that the human mind is so small and sinks under the weight of minutiae." We now live in an age replete with baggage, an age in which we've become obsessed with facts as the arbiters of reality. And it's important that we differentiate here between facts and truth, as these are two very different things. In any argument or debate, both sides will bring their own set of facts to the table, those that best support the argument they're attempting to make. In the immigration debate, for example, one side may point to facts indicating increased crime rates, a decreased quality of life, and community cohesiveness. The other side of the debate may cite increased earnings for large corporations able to take advantage of cheaper labor, or carefully chosen crime statistics of their own, or point to the taxes paid by migrants. Both of these are fact pictures. Both could be considered true, and every side of every argument has them. And this brings us to one of the most powerful tactics used by our absurdly corrupt, controlled press. They not only want you zoomed in, they insist that you be zoomed in using a lens of their own creation, and have the shamelessness and audacity to pretend that their lens is the only valid one, when in fact, not only is their lens not the only prism through which to view the world, but many would argue that it's the least valid and most manipulative, a profound mischaracterization with the intent to deceive. To give a real-world example, let's recall the alternative facts fiasco a short while ago with Kellyanne Conway. In this case, the media laughed and jeered derisively at Kellyanne in an effort to push forward the narrative that they were the only side in possession of facts, and that Conway's facts were actually lies because they ran counter to CNN's. Consider for a moment just how deeply disingenuous and disgusting this is, how manipulative and dishonest and misleading. And yet, for weeks, the media had a field day, mocking and laughing and generally insulting the poor woman. This is their modus operandi, and it still works wonders on millions around the world. It should be obvious why they'd want the world viewed through their own lens, but why the obsessive focus on the details and the minutiae of the fact picture? To best answer this, let's go back to the example mentioned a moment ago, the immigration issue. If one were to attempt to ignore the noise and pull back for the broadest objective perspective, the question might be boiled down to something very simple, such as, is life for the average American citizen living in areas with a heavy influx of migrants better or worse than it was a few decades ago? Is the average American healthier or happier? Do they feel a deeper connection with their nation and community? It's this type of simplification that they have to combat at any cost, because the answer becomes so crystal clear, and essentially ends the debate for many. One of my favorite Whitman quotes has always been, "Simplicity is the glory of expression." The devil hides in the details, and I'd go one step further and say it's his duty to create details where there needn't be any. Beware the bespectacled TV pundit seeking to condescendingly explain your world to you. There is no role more powerful than that of the personality that positions himself between you and your reality, and pretends to act as the trusted interpreter. A translator is a gatekeeper, and has near total power over the resulting story and narrative. One of the most profound and profoundly true statements Trump ever uttered seemed to be a flippant throwaway line in one of his speeches, in which he referred to the painstakingly creative narratives emanating from the press and political opponents, no doubt with the help of writers and think tanks, by saying, "It's just words, folks, they're just words." This sounds simple on the surface, and there's no telling how he meant it, but it makes an important point. Just like facts can be used to prove anything, words can be used to prove anything, and I do mean anything. A term I constantly come back to that I feel we should all become familiar with: verisimilitude, the quality of appearing to be true or real. A fascinating dynamic of this process of deception and indoctrination is that nearly all of us, even those who buy into the narratives pushed by the controlled press, have had a building sense of unease over time, as if something isn't quite right, though it's difficult to put our finger on just what that something might be. My contention is that this is due to our intuitively or subconsciously recognizing we're being lied to, led astray via a series of small and subtle steps, which creates a building cumulative over time. Pulling back can act as the means of recognizing the divergence between this reality as posited and actual truth. The Romans, creators of one of the most stable and long-lasting empires in human history, acutely recognized this eternally tricky issue of deceptive noise. And the core of their justice system became cui bono, or who gains. They forced themselves to pull back, ignore the details and posturing and the word stew emitted by either side, and instead sought a single objective means of gauging probable guilt or innocence, using this as their starting point, their fundamental basis for their judgments. One could easily argue this made their system more profoundly just than our own at present, in which anyone with a great deal of money can hire a legal team capable of winning almost any case, shamelessly conjuring facts and words with the intent to mislead, to serve their own ends. And finally, another in the long list of reasons as to why pulling back is so important in debates, arguments, discussions. Premise is everything. Many dishonest actors attempt, often unconsciously, to force their opponent to argue within their framework, a bit like two men asking one another to come over to their own homes to settle some tension instead of meeting at a middle ground. The postmodernist and cultural Marxist framework that has subverted our university system since the 1950s operates from a foundational premise that whites, Christians, Western culture, and the patriarchy are the root of all evils in this world. We too often get drawn into playing their game and discussing branches springing from this tree, as opposed to pointing out that the entire root is sick and diseased and degenerate. Pulling back to a loftier vantage point allows us to see all of this for what it is, and not waste time with deck chairs on the Titanic, and instead focus on avoiding the iceberg and inevitable looming disaster. The epitome of the far left that big money has ushered into power over the past few decades represent the portion of humanity that most strongly prizes education over true intellect or problem-solving ability. When we consider this alongside the fact that our educational institutions now double as indoctrination camps, this means they now consider a person intelligent or educated precisely to the degree that they've been indoctrinated with their own ideology, which in turn means that only the most willing tools of this globalist machine ascend easily through the ranks of power. If the root of this problem isn't recognized quickly and comprehensively, with some intellectual clarity, this cancer threatens to destroy the West completely. A slow and painful death by subversion. I've only just begun to touch upon a subject that deserves far more time and attention, but I'm going to try to avoid these becoming overwhelming hour-long dissertations, and we'll pick up this subject and related ones in future episodes. In the meantime, thank you for listening to my first cast. Another heartfelt thank you to those willing to support my creative efforts and quite literally keep the lights on and keep the fridge stocked at the moment. And to everyone, remember, a loftier vantage point provides more context, broader perspective, and a deeper understanding. Beware those seeking to pull you back down into the weeds.